My sister texted that the new moon was on the day she landed back in Seattle after our mother's funeral. What does the moon have to do with anything spiritual? It's a globe that is 238,900 miles from Earth. Welcome to Calm in the Chaos Interfaith Center, where we know that we humans are very connected to the natural world, and that includes the moon. When I was a public school teacher, it was well known that the days surrounding a full moon were very busy days for children who were learning how to regulate their emotions and behaviors. Was that a fact or a myth? Well, taking my limited experiences as informally collected data, I have to say it was spot on. So I vote for fact. Our bodies are about 60% water, and when we take into consideration that the moon controls the tides of the great bodies of water on our planet, it seems reasonable to think that the moon pulls the tides within us as well. How does this connect with us spiritually? To answer this, we need to correctly identify the phases of the moon, which means how we perceive the moon's light and shadow patterns from our position here on Earth. The cycle of phases repeats every 29 and a half days. Let's begin with that full moon, the phase that receives a lot of attention because it can be quite dramatic. The full moon represents something in our lives that has come full circle. It's a completion feeling. We're done. On to the next project or idea or intention or desire. When the moon is completely lit by the sun, it looks like a ball in the sky because that's where our position is on Earth to see it completely lit. It's always lit up by the sun, but our perception changes. The total circle or sphere represents fulfillment, the end of a cycle of learning, the completion of a search, the coming home of an idea, or the total clarity of a struggle. Celebrations often surround full moons with people gathering at a fire or walking a labyrinth in the evening. It's also a time to let go of anything that does not serve us anymore. That may mean an idea, a desire, or even a person who has become toxic to our growth. This release is a powerful spiritual practice. But first, we have to be aware of the full moon showing up. I offer that on September 17th, we stand outdoors and drink in the beauty of the full moon. This particular full moon is called a corn moon. The names for full moons were given by indigenous people, mostly of North America. Without a printed calendar, people looked to the skies to keep track of time, of seasons, and of days. The sun easily allows us to keep track of each passing 24-hour period, and the full moons help us to keep track of the seasons. The corn moon is named such because it arrives at the time when the three sisters of indigenous people staples, corn, squash, and beans, were harvested. Just in case you're keeping track, I'll say that on October 17th, there is a hunter's moon. On November 15th, the full moon is a beaver moon. And on December 15th, we will see what is called the cold moon. Now, connecting with the phases of the moon can help us to understand the rhythm of our lives here. There are patterns and rhythms that underlay every aspect of our lives and our hearts, our bodies, our minds, and spirits as well. But we have been taught to identify and work with things that are other than moon phases and rhythms of the body, heart, mind, and spirit. So now let's call attention back to that natural phenomenon. When my sister told me that a new moon accompanied the day after our mother's burial, I did look up a few facts about the moon and was very fascinated to learn even more than I already knew. The new moon, where we know it's there in the sky but cannot see it, signifies beginnings. Perhaps we pause during the new moon day to purposefully select a characteristic we'd like to enhance in ourselves for the coming weeks. Be more kind or less controlling, less critical, more helpful. Or perhaps we pause to revisit a hobby or a habit, such as reading more, visiting friends more, smiling more. The new moon gives us pause to begin again. For my sisters and me, it's a time to begin to identify what our lives are like with the absence of a mortal mother. In between the full moon and the new moon are the waning and waxing periods. The waxing moon, when the slice seems to grow larger each evening, represents our journey and allows us to make course corrections along the way. The waning moon, when the slice seems to grow smaller each evening, is the time for inward reflection and allowing ourselves to anticipate the new beginning of the new moon. Connecting to the phases of the moon is a universal way to connect to nature, to the vastness of the cosmos, to remember that we're not alone, and to remember just how mysterious and beyond our understanding the universe can be. Now, before you think I've gone off the deep end with trying to connect the moon to our spiritual lives, let me remind you that our Christian friends celebrate a holy day called Easter each spring. If you're at all familiar with this holiday, you know it can be as early as March 22nd and as late as April 25th. Many of us plan our spring activities around the answer to when is Easter this year? Here's a fun fact: the date of Easter is determined each year because of the phases of the moon. Yes, the moon. Easter is the Sunday after the Paschal moon. The Paschal moon is the first full moon after the spring equinox. And the spring equinox is another natural phenomenon based on the position of the sun. So the holiest Christian day of the year is based on the sun and the moon. In addition to the full moon awareness, there are other spiritual rituals that occur this time of year. Maybe not in your life yet, but they are certainly worth considering. Mabon is a holiday that is celebrated by people whose faith tradition heavily relies on the natural world's rhythms. We might call Mabon fall equinox. It's a time for balancing our lives, for making sure that the work and leisure balance receives attention. Or we may look at our alone versus with others balance. Make sure that it's in line with what keeps us healthy. Equinox, because it is the period of time when daylight and darkness each fill 12 hours, is all about rebalancing us. It's a time for harvesting, sharing the bounty with neighbors, and holding gatherings to honor the change from the brightest half of the year to the beginning of the darkest half of the year. If you tend to lean towards decorating with pumpkins, corn shocks, and gourds instead of skeletons, bats, and cobwebs, you may want to celebrate Mabon. My training as an interfaith spiritual leader allows me to see that our spiritual growth is one of inclusion rather than a clearly defined exclusionary faith path. I don't have all the answers. In fact, I have many, many more questions than answers. But the idea of opening myself to participate in new rituals or becoming aware of a full moon's call to my soul does not take away from my following Jesus as a perfect example of how to live as a human being. No, broadening my understandings of spiritual lessons that were not taught to me in Sunday school does not diminish those that were. Fall equinox is September 22nd. The next full moon is September 17th. But tonight, the moon will continue to be in the waxing crescent stage, where a little more light is reflected each evening, leading us eventually to another full moon. So step outside tonight, take some long, deep breaths, and see what the moon is calling to you. What is it saying? What do you need? All of God's creation is a wonderment to behold. Blessings on all. Speaking of rituals, I invite you to join me on October 31st. It's at 9 p.m. and it's a short Zoom meeting for us to celebrate autumn. It's an interfaith autumn gathering. We're celebrating Samhain, we're celebrating All Hallows Eve, and we're celebrating All Saints Day. It's an interfaith gathering. All you need is a candle and a match and the Zoom link that's in the next frame. I'll see you then, and it's okay if you're in your jammies by 9 p.m. I get it.